Have you ever felt that instead of living your own life, you were just following a script written by someone else? As if every decision had been shaped by expectations that weren't really yours? If so, perhaps it's because, for a long time, we've been taught that life is a straight line. Be born, grow up, work, get married, grow old. But what if that straight line wasn't the right path? Carl Jung believed that true life begins at 40, and not because something magical happens at that age, but because that's when we start to see beyond the illusion. As children, we dream of being astronauts, artists, adventurers. But at some point, these possibilities were replaced by obligations. Studying, getting a good job, raising a family. The problem lies not in these choices themselves, but in the fact that they are often not really ours. We go with the flow because it seems right, because everyone does it the same way. But deep down a voice begins to whisper, what if there was something else? Think of life as a sculptor who has spent years gathering tools, learning techniques, experimenting with materials. In the first 40 years, you've gathered everything you need: experiences, learnings, successes, and mistakes. But now the time has come to actually begin your masterpiece. But to do so, you need to let go of the fear of making mistakes and stop sculpting a statue that doesn't represent who you really are. This process doesn't happen overnight. It starts subtly, with small questions. You look in the mirror and realize that you don't fully recognize yourself. Does what you wanted in your youth still make sense? Do the values that guided your decisions still seem right? Or do you feel like something is out of place, like you've put on clothes that no longer fit? This restlessness can be frightening, but it's also an invitation. Jung called this individuation, the moment when we begin to free ourselves from the masks we put on to please others. The persona we created to fit into society was useful. Yes. It helped us to navigate the world, to survive. But now it has become a prison. And this is where the real question arises. Are you willing to break free? Are you ready to confront who you really are, without the filters imposed by years of conditioning? Because this process can be uncomfortable, but it can also be the most liberating thing you've ever experienced. If you feel this call for something more, you're not alone. This awakening happens to everyone who allows themselves to be questioned. And believe me, there is something on the other side of this crisis. Something bigger, more authentic, more yours. Have you noticed how society pushes us into an endless race? Study, work, money, success. But success for whom? For us or for those who have defined what success should mean? And when we hit 40, something changes. Suddenly we realize that we've been running for years without even knowing if we wanted to reach that destination. This is the silent crisis that few talk about, but many feel. Cornel West would say that this is the moment when man needs to free himself from the prison of conformism. He talked about the importance of looking inwards and questioning the invisible structures that shape our lives. The problem is that we don't always want to look inwards, because when we do, we see all the concessions we've made, all the versions of ourselves we've abandoned to fit into a mold that was never made for us. But what if this crisis isn't the end but the beginning? Imagine an ancient navigator on the high seas. For years he has followed maps that others have drawn. Then one day, he realizes that the map no longer makes sense. He may insist on following the routes he knows even though he knows something is wrong. Or he can lift the compass, look at the horizon and decide to navigate on his own. That's the turning point, when you realize that you have a choice. At 40, the first signs of this change appear. A job that no longer motivates, a routine that seems empty. Small doubts that were once ignored now become impossible to silence. What was once a whisper becomes an internal cry. Is that all? And this is the moment when many fall into despair, because we've been taught that questioning means being lost. But in fact, questioning is the first step towards finding yourself. Søren Kierkegaard said that anguish is not a problem, but a calling. When we feel this discomfort, it is because we are ready for something greater. But in order to respond to this call, we must first accept that the life we have built up until now may not be the life we really want. And that hurts, because it means admitting that we may have spent years following the wrong road. But do you know what hurts more? Continuing on it, knowing that there is another way. Now stop and think. Which parts of your life today were chosen by you, and which were imposed? If you could start again, would you keep everything the same? This is not a question to make you give up, but to remind you that you still have time. At 40, life isn't over. It's finally begun. This is the moment when you decide whether you want to continue following a script written by others or take on the role of author of your own story. The decision is yours. But one thing is certain. You can't ignore this restlessness forever. Sooner or later, life will force you to choose. And when that moment comes, the only question that matters is, are you ready to live for real? The truth is that no one can make this decision for you. You can ignore the discomfort, pretend everything is fine, keep sticking to the same old routines. But if you've come this far, something inside you already knows the answer. Now what are you going to do with it? Carl Jung said that the second half of life is not about accumulating more, but about discovering what really matters. And for that, we need to let go of what no longer makes sense. Think of a hot air balloon. It only rises when it gets rid of the extra weight. Now look at your life. What is holding you back? What do you need to let go of to finally feel light? Fear is real. The fear of failure, the fear of disappointment, the fear of discovering that you may not know who you really are. But what's the alternative? Live the next 40 years bound by the same ties? Settle for an existence that doesn't reflect your truth? You deserve better than that. Imagine for a moment that you have the chance to start again. But not from scratch, because you're not starting from nothing. You already have experience. You've already learned. You've already fallen and gotten up. Now the difference is that you can do it consciously, without having to follow rules that aren't yours. That's the beauty of the second half of life. This is where you can finally be who you were always meant to be. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations, he was reflecting on the power of acceptance. He understood that we don't have control over everything, but we do have control over our choices. And that's what defines what comes next. You can continue living to please others, or you can decide from now on to live for yourself. And before you say it's too late, remember, real life begins when you choose to live it for real. It can be today. It can be now. What are you waiting for? So if you liked our video, subscribe to the channel and share it with those who need it most.